your focus requires energy. That is physiologic, that is neurobiological energy. When your brain is thinking really hard, it uses up energy. The only way to recharge your battery is to stop focusing.
If there is like one skill that you think has helped you the most in the past few years in terms of figuring out what you want to do with your life, what would you say it would be?
I would say that it is focus, but the reason being is because I have spent so much of my life not having that. I just have flashbacks of me sitting with my MCAT book open on the table, but I'm actually looking at the video game.
Right.
I'm playing video games when I should not be focusing on that. I think that we spent many years struggling with that. And I think recently we were able to get more clarity in our focus. And so I
Right.
think our life has taken off in a different trajectory.
I feel like in college and throughout med school, I would have many weekends, months, even stretches at a time where all I had to do was study all day. And during those hours of studying, I was just wishing that I was doing something different. Or like you said, like I was halfway in one door, halfway in another door, like wanting to do something different. Whereas now that we have been building Cajun Koi, I'm pretty much like 100% focused on working all the time. I never have to worry about, I would rather be doing something else right now because there's literally nothing else I would rather be doing.
Yeah, same.
And so when did that switch come?
I think focus does a few things for you. Focus helps you pick where you want to go. It gives you clarity on how to get there, and then it gives you clarity on what to do right now. So like I think focus just helps you on every single step of the journey. And so I think a key word there is clarity. And I think that when you're focused on doing things that you feel like you aren't supposed to be doing, or you feel like when you're doing things that are causing guilt or anxiety, or you're feeling like a procrastinator, or you're feeling unproductive, all of those things kill your clarity. And so even though you're focusing in the moment, like I'm very focused on playing this video game, I know in the back of my mind, I shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
I'm anxious, I'm guilty, or like I'm very focused on even studying for med school. And I feel like I should be studying, I guess. I feel like becoming a doctor is the path for me, I guess. And so when you're doing all these things and you're doubting yourself, yes, there's focus, but the clarity is not there. And so that's why I feel like our focus was wavering a lot in those years. So once we've been able to align, like, this is what I want in my life. I want my lifestyle to be like this. I want to wake up every day doing this. I want to make this kind of impact on society and to other people. When we finally got that clarity, then yeah, our focus is unwavering now. We know exactly what to do, how to do it, and why we're doing it. I think the big reason is why.
That's true. You can't really focus on something for long term unless you have a clear idea, clarity, like you said, about why you want to do it. And I've been really interested in focus and developed kind of a 3-part framework for thinking about focus.
Okay.
I like to compare it to like a diver. Think about like Michael Phelps, some competitive swimmer who's going to a race.
Is your focus protocol or?
This is called the focus formula.
Oh, formula, right.
This is something that I've come up with based on a lot of reading I've done, a lot of flow research and time management, procrastination. But there are kind of 3 steps to thinking about focus. The first step is a preparatory phase. And this is exactly in line with what you said. You can't get into focus unless you have clarity about why you want to focus. And that clarity goes pretty broad. If we talk about habit building a lot, it is identifying the identity that you want to build, the person that you want to become, or the long-term goal that you want to achieve. So we think about the focus flashlight analogy. Our brain has 2 states. We call it focus and diffuse mode. And imagine you're in a darker room with a flashlight. So focus mode is the only light in the room is the flashlight you're holding, and you're pointing it at something. So you can only see that tiny area, but you can see it really clearly, right? But everything else around is black. That's focus mode. Diffuse mode would be you turn off your flashlight, and then you can turn on an overhead light in the room. But the overhead light's pretty dim, and so you can see the layout of the room. You know there's a lot to it, but you can't really focus on and make the details out of any particular thing. That's diffuse mode. And that's what we kind of know as like brain wandering. Your mind wanders to different things that it's learned or it's looking at. And so being able to focus on something and engage in something for a long time actually requires you to cycle in and out of those 2 states. And so if you think about that analogy a bit further, imagine that you're looking for something in your room and you're holding your flashlight's on. Most people think that you need your flashlight on the whole time to find what you're looking for. But what if you're walking around the room, your flashlight's on, and then you go into a corner? And no matter where you turn the flashlight, all you see is the wall. then the most logical thing to do would be to turn off the flashlight, turn on the overhead light, and then make your way back to the middle of the room. It's sometimes really difficult to do that if your flashlight's on. So if you're at a point where you're stuck in the corner with your flashlight and you continue to try to hyper focus, you're going to burn yourself out because it wastes a lot of energy, first of all. But second of all, like, you're going to get frustrated because you can't figure out what you're trying to figure out. And so entering diffuse mode for whatever you're doing is going to allow you to recenter, see things from a different angle, get more creative with your thinking, look around the room, and then you can refocus, which is also why it's probably not the best idea, at least from what neuroscience also tells us about focusing, where you don't want to try to be in like a hyper-focused state for more than like 90 minutes at a time. That's what they call, what's that thing?
Ultradian rhythm.
Ultradian rhythm, where our brain kind of burns its battery out after 90 minutes or so. And so to add to that analogy, your flashlight has a battery. It's not charged forever. It dies after about 90 minutes or so. And at which point you're going to have to recharge it. And if you keep trying to use it, you're not going to be able to see very well. And so taking that break and cycling between focus and diffuse mode will be able to sustain your focus for longer. And so that's something that would help a lot with people who are trying to learn something new or focus on work for a long period of time. It's strategically stepping in and stepping out of that focused state to accomplish it more. Let's put this to an actual practical example. Like in our business, we write YouTube scripts or we do research on YouTube videos. And there are times when I have in the past made a goal to like, I want to finish writing this entire script today. And I'll say, I have this video about procrastination or something, and I'm going to spend the whole day. And my goal today is to finish that script. And like, that's a pretty good goal, I guess. Like, I have one thing I want to do all day. But the issue that I used to make in the past was I'll just sit down and just try to write that script until I finished it. And it would take me literally the entire 10-hour day to finish that script. Whereas a better approach would probably be like, you spend an hour in deep focus with it. And then for the next few hours, you step away from it. And I do some other work. Because when you step away, your brain doesn't stop working on the first one. That's the most interesting thing about our brain, is that when you're in diffuse mode, you're still working on the previous thing. Your brain is still processing all the stuff that it focused on. That's why a lot of people say that one of the best things you can do to focus is to take a break and go take a shower or go take a walk or go do some chores. Because when you step away from the thing that you're working on, your brain is still in the background processing that stuff. And so you might have an idea that would help you when you return to that thing you're focused on. It'll bring it to life. And so now my process is, I'll focus on the script for like an hour and a half. And then once I hit a wall, I'm actually going to stop working on it. I'll take a break, maybe go work out, take a shower, have some lunch, talk to you, work on something else. And then while I'm working on something else, I always suddenly have an idea. I'm like, oh, that's what I was supposed to write about. And then I'd either jot it down or return to my script. And then I'd be able to write a lot more efficiently and finish a lot more. And so it's taking that strategic engagement and disengagement from focus to accomplish more. And it's directing it in the right place at the right time, knowing that diffuse mode and focus mode both are important for accomplishing work.
Yeah, the balance is necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, what is your motivation?
What is your motivation? And the more powerful you can make that, the easier it's going to be to get into focus for it because you have such a strong reason to do it. So before you even try to focus, that preparatory phase is pretty important. And in the diver analogy, that would be the diver like standing up on the diving board. They're waiting for the gun to shoot before they jump into the pool. They're preparing their mind mentally. They're thinking about what's going to happen with this race. They're thinking about how it's going to go. But they don't really know exactly. They're not in the water yet. So they're not doing the motions. They're just like planning ahead to figure out what they think is going to be the best way to win this race. The second part of the framework is what I call the engagement step. And the engagement step is they have just now heard the gun and they've jumped off the diving board. It's that initial plunge from stillness. I would say for most people, this is the most challenging part about focus, is taking that first step. There's so many analogies that correspond to why. One of the most popular ones is that Newton's law. It's like an object at rest stays at rest. Oh. An object in motion stays in motion. Mm-hmm. The hardest step is that first step.
Yeah, overcoming inertia.
Yeah. So engagement is, like you're on the diving board, you know it's going to suck, the race, you know you're going to be sweating, you're going to be tired, but how do you make that first jump to go in the pool? And then the third step is sustaining. So like now that you're in the water, like your juices are flowing, you have a long race ahead of you. How do you maintain that drive and that passion and that motivation to continue going? And then once you finish, you kind of reset the cycle, and then you have to like re-clarify what you want and re-engage and focus. In each of those three steps, the preparation part, the engagement part, and the sustaining part, they have many different frameworks that we always talk about. The preparatory phase, big ones being habit building. We talk about identity-based habits all the time. NDH, clarifying your goals, clarifying how you want to do things. The engagement phase, we have a complete checklist to get you over that inertia hump, which is called focus mode, which we'll talk about too. And then for the sustainment part, there are a lot of strategies to block distractions, strengthen your mind to endure longer stretches of focus, things like meditation, things like exercise, even the foods you eat. But in order to really achieve like long-term sustainable focus, you have to think about all three parts of that cycle. And although we've kind of combined a lot of different sources together, that formula is based off of like neuroscience. It's based off of like Stephen Kotler's flow psychology. It's based off of the brain types and stuff that we've come up with. And it's a really powerful framework that I think has at least worked for me in making sure that I'm always organized in some way of figuring out what I want to do every day. And it's not perfect, but I think if people will just take that approach with it, they could be more productive every day.
Okay. Yeah, I like that you broke it down into the framework, because at least I know from when we were teaching a lot of students, most students just think about, when you say focus, they just think about that very last part.
Yeah.
It's a sustaining focus. It's like, I need to sit down and I have 2 hours to get this thing done. And I just pray that I have enough focus to get this done.
Right.
But a lot of people leave out all the other steps about the preparing and the taking action and then leading into the sustaining.
Uh-huh.
So before we even get to talking about like actual getting the work done, we need to clarify what it is that we want and who we want to become.
What does it mean to prepare yourself for focus? Is there a good way to identify what your goals are or how you would set a goal for yourself? What's your goal right now?
I realized that my focus was my biggest problem when I was at this stage in my life where my attention was split between too many things. Part of it was in my regular day job as a physician. Part of it was seeing if there was a possible different lifestyle apart from this doctor life that manifested in like YouTube and entrepreneurship. And my attention was being divided between the two, and both of them were suffering. And so I think that was when I realized that focus is the problem.
Trying to do two things at once.
Yeah, trying to do two things at once. I guess more so like trying to become two different people at once, you know? Because for one thing, like becoming a doctor who works in the corporation that I was with requires a very specific identity. You are a rule follower. You have protocols. You stay in line. You take orders, which is like all not bad thing, you know, like you need order for like a big system to work. And then the other identity I was trying to adopt was that of a YouTuber or an entrepreneur, someone who doesn't stand in line, someone whose very nature to succeed is you have to be a disruptor and you have to think outside the box, and you think that rules are there to be broken. So my focus was trying to be two different people and living two different lives. And that was very hard to keep them in order. And so like every day when I try to wake up and I try to figure out what needs to be done right now, it's hard to figure out what to do because you're trying to do two things at once.
Yeah. Well, if you're working for somebody, then what you have to do is pretty laid out, huh?
Out, but you still got to do really good work.
I know, but like at least the expectation of what you need to do has been clarified, usually for you in terms of the job description, right?
Yeah, but you got to do it well. That's a different area of the focus cycle, I guess. You got to do it well.
Yeah. So how did you decide on leaving one of those identities behind or switching focus towards one of those?
Yeah. So when this takes us to the later part of the cycle, the focus cycle and the sustain, where you're actually deep in the work, right? You're focused on doing the thing. And in the back of your mind, you have all these anxiety and you have all this guilt and have all these negative emotions about doing the thing. Then the focus doesn't feel fulfilling and it doesn't feel enjoyable. And I'm specifically describing my day-to-day job as a physician. Of course, there's a lot of things that were rewarding about that job. But when I compare it to the job when I'm actually writing and making content and educating people online, then that was a different kind of focus. That work to me felt more fulfilling. And it felt like I was actually doing what I was meant to be doing. And so that focus that I was trying to sustain came more naturally, and it came with it a lot more energy. And so I was able to sustain it for longer, and I was enjoying doing it.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point about the sustain aspect of focus, which we can touch on quickly, which is motivation. There's a very popular framework for thinking about motivation called self-determination theory, where people are much more likely to enjoy doing something if they have three things. If they have autonomy, if they have competency, and if they have community. Being a creator for you ticked those boxes more so than being a physician was. Because when you're creating, you have the autonomy to choose exactly what you want to make, exactly why you want to make it. You have competency because you can see growth in your channel and you can see that your videos are getting better. And you have community. You're doing it with me, for one. And you're also building followers who also aspire to be like you or learn from you. Whereas maybe in the hospital, you've lost that sense of autonomy a bit because you are following orders and you feel like there's lack of creativity in what you're doing. You probably can't really tell if you're getting better because you're not like, I don't know if you're tracking the success rates of your patients or the speed of your interaction.
It was zero for a long time because I was a COVID doctor and
Yeah.
COVID patients don't do well.
Yeah. And so that there was a lack of improvement in your skills. You couldn't really tell if you're getting better as a physician. But I think autonomy probably was a big one for you.
Autonomy was huge.
Yeah.
I think community was also pretty big.
You worked, I mean, you had like co-residents and like other doctors.
I mean, on the
working with
way
you.
up, you have like medical students and co-residents and fellow
Even as
attendings.
attending, you have other attendings with you too.
You do, right? But I always felt like an outsider the entire journey because something about entrepreneurship, I didn't know it was an entrepreneurial mindset at the time. I knew it was something to do with creativity and something about separating your time from what you earn and something about building systems and efficiency. Those are all things that don't come with a job as a physician. And those are all things I was seeking a lot. And I don't think that most people in med school I really connected with them on those topics.
Building systems?
I'll tell you that systems in the hospital, but the hospital that I worked at, probably known for its efficiency.
It's known for its efficiency.
Efficiency. Yeah. The group that I work, the hospital organization that I work with is known for its efficiency. And even then, it's like not what you would expect. But that aside, it's just creativity is not something that you see in medicine. You know, there's a way to do it, and there's evidence to back it. So you're not going to stray from that.
Yeah, the people who are creative in medicine are the top 0.01% who actually have the clinical practice and the research practice to try new things.
Yeah, I mean, creativity is difficult to do when you're trying to do evidence-based things.
Yeah, it takes time to develop evidence-based practices.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that I just felt like my mindset was somewhere else. A lot of my peers kept telling me, like, you just keep your head down and do your work, you delay gratification, and you'll be taken care of in the future. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. Like, that's all great and everything. But what if I want to, like, be creative now? What if I want to do something right now?
So it sounds like the first part, if we can circle back to developing a more focused mindset every single day, is not only identifying what your goal is, but to first identifying what is missing or what is lacking in the enjoyment of the day-to-day. Like if you can find the gap or find the hole in where you want there to be more fulfillment, either autonomy or creativity or something.
Yeah, that's a good example for like our day-to-day. Even for anyone who's like still in school, when you go into focus mode, you're like very narrowed in on like a specific problem. You're like looking at details. But then if you spend too much time there, you don't see the big picture.
Yeah.
So you gotta sometimes step back, turn on diffuse mode. You can see the big picture, see, oh, why am I learning this? How is this going to be helpful to me? Once you go back to focus mode, it'll make that focus mode even clearer because now you know what to do with that information that you're trying to tediously learn. So that's another example just from like a more ground level, from like a wide like day-to-day perspective in terms of like our biology. What is the biggest example of diffuse mode? It would be sleeping.
Sleeping.
So if you just imagine you're trying to be focused all the time, like you're just basically never allowing your body to rest. And so going into diffuse mode, sleeping, or I guess sleeping is the biggest one, but like you mentioned, walking, showering, meditating,
Yeah. Allowing your mind to wander.
chores. Yeah. Allowing your mind to wander is not a bad thing. It is allowing your mind to make connections. I like to think about your mind as like your assistant, where like you spend focus mode getting information in there and you're allowing your mind, okay, like mull over this a little bit while I go do this other thing. And then when you go back and check on your mind, it's like, how has it been going mulling over that?
Yeah.
Then you'll find some new path or a new creation or you feel more enlightened. And sometimes when your mind is just like mulling over it and it finds something so exciting, it will like disrupt what you're doing right now. It's like, hey, look, guess what? I found this. And that's when you have like the light bulb moment, like in the shower or something. So that can happen too.
It finds the connection.
Yeah. And the connection is so overwhelming that it's like,
Yeah. You might have to stop what you're doing because
Yeah.
it's so revolutionary. And probably one of the most dangerous things for your focus is using social media or playing video games or like watching a movie or TV. Those activities are actually engaging your brain in focus mode. So the people who say like, oh yeah, I need to take a break every 25 minutes of work or an hour of work. And if they break by scrolling social media, they're actually not taking a break. They're just using their focus mode in a different way. Playing video games, scrolling social media, watching TV, those are things that are still engaging you in focus mode. They're not allowing your mind to wander because you're focused on watching that TikTok. You're focused on watching the video. You're focused on playing a video game. Video games are probably one of the most focused things you can do. Like if you're locked in a game of Dota, all you're thinking about is Dota. Like you're not worrying about your taxes. You're not worrying about your homework. All that stuff comes when you die, or like when the game's over. But you're so focused that you can't even think about anything else. You're blocking everything out. And so when you take breaks, you have to be very conscious and aware that you are not doing something that is engaging your focus.
Right. I like to think about it as active versus passive breaks. Like an active break, you're actively allowing your mind to diffuse. That's when you're doing things like going on a walk or disconnecting. When you're passively taking a break, you are giving your attention over to someone else to steer it for you. Like you're a passenger in a car. Like you're going to watch an anime, like the anime is going to drive the car and you're going to sit there and watch. You're going to pay attention. So that is, I consider that passive breaking. It's like you're not allowing yourself to actually take a break. You're just allowing someone else to steer you.
That's a good point too that you bring up. And so all the stuff that we're talking about, engaging the flashlight and disengaging the flashlight, I would say that in the formula, this is all in the engagement step. This is all, how do you jump off the diving board into the pool? How do you turn on the flashlight so that you can start focusing? And then the sustainment part is that cycling of focus, diffuse, focus, diffuse. And so there are also other ways to make diving off that diving board a lot easier. And so that when you step into focus, you're setting yourself up for success. Again, if you think about an athlete or something, if you don't warm up or if you jump into some kind of exercise too quickly, you're risking your ability for a good workout, right? Like if you start off sprinting, you're going to burn out faster than if you kind of gradually ease into it. Your body needs to warm up first. And so there is an acronym that we developed that would allow anyone who wants to engage in focus to do it in the most effective and smooth way possible. And very conveniently, we call it the focus checklist.
I think it's important to dive more into the focus battery, just so everyone understands, because a lot of our students had this revelation when we taught this, is that your focus requires energy. That is physiologic, that is neurobiological energy, right? That is nature. The nature of your human body is it requires energy. When your brain is thinking really hard, it uses up energy. So the only way to recharge your battery is to stop focusing. And where a lot of people kind of misconstrue this idea is that they think that to get more focus is willpower, but you can't recharge your battery by putting more willpower in there. You know what I mean? You need to just take a break and let it recharge on its own.
Right. Those are different things.
Naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where anime kind of goes wrong. If you watch a lot of anime, you'll know that the main character always is able to use willpower to eventually beat the enemy. Like even though their like legs are chopped off and they're like bleeding from the throat and their arms are broken, somehow they just use willpower and then they can muster up the energy. That's not how it works.
Yeah, that's not how it works. You
That's
just
not
gotta
how it
take a
works.
break.
Yeah, think about an athlete. Like if someone is running a race and they cramp up in their leg, they can't just will themselves to keep running. Their leg is shut down.
Yeah.
Like you can't will yourself to keep running. So anime kind of gets that wrong, but it's inspirational. Yeah. So the focus checklist, I guess you kind of ideated this more so, but where did that come from and how is this going to be practical for someone who is struggling to focus and accomplish work every day?
It's like basically a culmination of all the stuff that we've been reading. And you know me, I like to create frameworks and anagram things. And so it just so happened that all the letters lined up and it spelled out focus. I don't even know how that happened.
So yeah, just describe how it's used and why it's used, and then we'll go into each letter.
So the good thing about focus is that you can train it. And if you want to be smart about training your focus, then you want to be able to measure it.
Right.
So the way that we measure our focus, we like to think about it as a single focus session. It just gives it a very clear boundary on what it is. So to us, the focus session always has like these 4 components. The focus session is a set time frame, and we recommend that you start with 25 minutes because that's like the average attention span of like a academic in some studies,
But no more than 90 minutes.
and no more than 90 minutes. The 25 minutes also came from the Pomodoro technique too. Like, so if you want more science on that, you can read that. So yeah, the focus session is a set time frame. It is doing one thing at a time. So it is unitasking, not multitasking. And it is done in a distraction-free way. And it is doing something where you're pushing your cognitive capabilities to the limit. So those last 2 things are from Deep Work, from Cal Newport. Our focus session is basically a combination of a bunch of things like the Pomodoro technique and Deep Work and the flow state. And so you have to have those 4 things to be a focus session. So that's how we measure. If you get better at completing a focus session, that's one way that you can track if you're actually training your focus, if you're making progress. The other thing that we always recommend is you treat your focus session like an actual habit. It's like something that you do. It's an action. It's like a behavior.
What's the value of treating it like a behavior?
The value of treating it like a behavior is that you can design your behavior. If you treat it like a habit or behavior, then you can set up systems in your daily routine or your life to ensure that it happens.
So treat your focus like a habit. Habits can be designed and habits can be measured.
Yep.
And those are all things that we want to incorporate and if we want to improve our focus, right? So a focus session is a way to improve your ability to focus. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Just think of yourself like an mental athlete. Yeah. The focus session is like a training session.
Okay. Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that there are specific elements to the training session, like there are components to it. That makes it much more easier to track, first of all.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if you just go to the gym and you just say like I'm just going to work out today, but you don't know what the workout's supposed to be, then how are you supposed to know what improvements you can make? There's no structure to it.
You need structure to measure.
You need structure for clarity.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't have clarity without structure. That's been expressed to us often from people we work with about why it's been so effective.
The athlete analogy, when they train, they do drills. Drills are very structured. You're doing this exercise, you're doing this many sets, doing this many reps, and you're measuring that. You can measure how much weight you're doing.
Yeah.
There are all these metrics that you can measure. So same with the focus session too.
Yeah, it's interesting about like a lot of the research around focus actually relates to peak performance in athletes because that's where most of the data collection comes from.
Because it's easy to measure.
Exactly. It's really easy to measure someone's performance when it comes to physical performance. It's been difficult to measure cognitive performance. And so what we've tried to do and what we're looking to get data with is finding a way to do this for cognitive performance.
So now that we've established that the focus session is a habit, then what is the 2-minute rule of this habit? And for those of you who don't know what the 2-minute rule is, if you're trying to build a habit, you condense that habit down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. And that should give you enough momentum to do the whole thing.
Okay.
Well, the whole focus checklist is the 2-minute rule. And then the focus session, which is at least 25 minutes, is the whole habit up to 90 minutes. Focus checklist is the checklist and an acronym. And each letter stands for something. And I guess we'll just run through each one because each one hits on a very important scientific element that helps you get in focus.
Right. Helps you engage in focus.
Helps you engage. Yeah. And the whole point is that you want to do this focus checklist the same way every time because this repetition helps build the habit. Habits are built on repetition and each repetition needs to be the same. You don't want to do it differently every time.
Right. And the reason that we want it to become a habit is to take that first step as easily as possible, right? Because the hardest step is the step from stillness.
Yes.
And so engaging, we just want to lower that friction
Inertia.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
And by doing it the same way every single time, we've seen it help a lot of people take that step.
Right.
Yeah.
So the focus checklist helps you get over that inertia. So F is familiar, and this is basically leveraging the idea of classical conditioning, where if you remember Pavlov's dog.
Very famous study.
Yeah. So what happens is this scientist, he is trying to condition this dog to feel hungry, right? And so he uses a familiar object, and that object is a bell. So every time he rings the bell, he's trying to get this dog. The sign for feeling hungry is the dog salivates, starts to like salivate, drool. So he rings the bell and then he shows the dog some food. Dog sees the food, it gets hungry. So then it starts to salivate. That's natural. So he just keeps doing this over and over, multiple repetitions. And eventually he starts ringing the bell. The dog salivates even before the food is even shown to the dog.
Right.
So the familiar object of the bell has been conditioned in the dog's brain to be associated with feeling hungry. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here with our brain, is that we have a familiar object, and that object we're associating with the feeling of focus. So we're trying to condition our brain to, whenever we use this thing, that we're going to feel more focused.
Right.
It doesn't have to be an object. It can be like a familiar routine or a ritual or something. Again, the athlete analogy is like, if you think of a basketball player who's shooting a free throw, right? They're trying to shoot it in the exact same way every single time.
Yeah.
So then they develop this ritual where they like bounce the ball a few times and then they shoot it, like muscle memory. Or like a tennis player who bounces a ball a few times before they serve. So it's kind of like the same idea too. It's like that pre-ritualistic movement that primes your brain into doing something. So it's the classical conditioning.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I think environment does help, but the nuance that we teach about familiarity is that it's something that you do, not necessarily like somewhere you're at. Because the reality is you're going to need to focus in a lot of different places. The more portable you can make your focus toolkit, that's what we call it, the better, which is why like a focus item for us is like a ring or like it's a routine. Like you do some stretches or you do some push-ups or you say some gratitude practice in your head. It's a practice. It's a thing that you do. As opposed to being like, I'm going to be in my specific chair in my room with this light on and this clock on. Like, sure, that could help, but you're not always going to be there when you need to focus.
Yeah.
And so making it a practice is more effective, we found.
Yeah, definitely. And it could be a simple thing too, as long as it's the same thing though. So that's why it's familiar, as long as it's familiar to you. Like some other students, their routine is like, I will fill up my very specific pink water bottle up to like this high in the bottle right before I do my focus session.
Right.
It's like that is enough to condition yourself. But yeah, if you ever check out our community, we're doing this focus band thing. And the key there is like you only do it when you're focusing.
Right.
So if you're using the focus band to focus, do not use it anywhere else. Like don't ruin the association that your brain has with that conditioning.
I have a few playlists that I've saved that are exactly 90 minutes long. And so I just put that playlist on, and then once it's done, I'll be like, oh, my session's over. So I don't even need a timer anymore. I don't need to set that up. I just put music on, and it's quiet enough to where it doesn't distract me, and it doesn't have any singing in it, so it also doesn't distract me. But that's another ritual that I've got into, just like associating that playlist with focus.
And usually like the first like 10, 15 seconds of the playlist is so familiar to you. It's like, oh, this feeling again.
Right.
And then you get right into focus.
Let's move on to the next one, which is O.
Yeah, O is objective. And it comes back to that unitasking that we're trying to do. We're not trying to multitask. And the thing is that we always want to be focusing on one thing at a time. Like your focus session, you can get multiple objectives done within the session, but always do it one at a time. It's just more efficient that way.
Right.
The thing about doing one thing at a time is that when you try to multitask, there's just a huge attention penalty that you get. It's like the multitasking penalty, or like the task switching penalty, or there's just so many names for it. But essentially, like when you switch from doing one thing to another, your attention lags behind. So like, oh, I'm reading this book, now I'm switching to this book. My brain is still thinking about the first book, and I'm trying to do the second one. And sometimes that takes a few seconds. But if you're doing something really intense or like really cognitively demanding, then it can take longer than seconds. And then the point is like the seconds add up to minutes, to more than minutes, depending on what you're doing.
If you're trying to push multiple rocks up a hill, but you can only push one at a time, because obviously you can only work on something one at a time. So you push one rock up a hill, and then you run over to push the other rock up the hill. That first rock is going to start rolling back. And then when you come back to it, you have to stop it first and then push it back up the hill again. So as you can think about it, like you're just making progress, and it's kind of like going back and forth. Like you're 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
As opposed to just pushing one up all the way and then the next one up all the way. It's a lot more efficient, costs a lot less energy, and you can do it faster.
The rock starts rolling down, but then the time it takes for you to run between one rock and another, is that attention residue is just, it builds up.
Yeah.
So C is capture. You want to talk about that one?
While we're in focus, it's very, very common for our mind, which is probably the most distracting thing there that we have, to interrupt. Your mind is kind of just like a thought generating machine. You just have thoughts randomly. Like you have ideas, random things come into mind, and you can't really choose when or why they happen. They just happen. And if you don't have a way to offload those thoughts, they just keep recurring. And so we love analogies. So we talk about analogies a lot. But one way I like to think about our mind is imagine like you're at home and you're watching TV and someone comes and rings the doorbell. Obviously, whatever you were doing, if you're watching a movie, that doorbell is going to distract you, right? That's the thought that comes to mind. And when you don't do anything about the thought, you kind of just like try to get back to focus, try to get back to watching that movie. What's going to happen? That person's probably going to ring the doorbell again, right? Like they didn't go anywhere. They're still there. They might knock this time. They might bang on the door and then ring it again. And so what you have to do is actually go address it. You don't actually have to like take care of whatever thing they have. At least just like make a mental note, like say like, hey, like, can you come back later? And then you come back down and you can sit down and focus. But what happens with our mind is it's a bit more different, because imagine how your house has like 5 or 6 doors and they all have doorbells. And so if you don't address them, you're just going to have all of these doorbells just ringing constantly. And you're never going to be able to focus if you just have doorbells going off every minute and a half, because you don't address any of them. You don't tell any of those people who are at the door that they should come back later. And so capturing is basically going to the door, you open it, you write down their phone number, you write down why they came, you say, hey, I'm going to get back to you later. And then you can get back down to watching your movie. So the way that we can capture during our focus session is you just want to have something to write stuff down with. It's that simple. Just have a pen and a notebook, or have a document on your computer open, like a Notion document or a notepad or something. And then whenever like a distracting thought comes to mind, you just write it down and you get back to it later. If you remember you have to do something, like go pick up a package or, go email somebody, just write it down real quick. Because if you don't, you're going to be reminded of it again in like 20, 30 minutes. This used to happen to me all the time when I was like in college. Like I would procrastinate obviously on like working on projects or doing homework and stuff, but I would be like out with friends. I'd be like out at a party, or I'd be out playing, doing whatever. And then randomly I'd be reminded, oh crap, I have to do that project again. Like I have to finish that by Monday. And then it'd pull me away from being present and having fun. And then I'd be like, I'll just worry about it later. And then like an hour later, it'd come back. It just comes back. The more unclosed loops, we call them, you have, the more distractible you'll be. And so the harder it's going to be to sustain and stay and engage and focus.
Our brain hates unclosed loops.
Yeah, it hates them.
Yeah. I mean, I hate, but like it
loves them. It loves them.
It takes up so much of your attention.
Yeah. It loves them because the one thing what the brain wants to do is it likes to think. It loves having thoughts.
It's curious.
Yeah, it just always wants to remind you of stuff. It wants to have the last word all the time. But we don't want it to do that. We want it to think about what we're focusing on, not these other random things that come up. And so
that movie we recently watched, the Spider-Verse, you leave all the audience on a cliffhanger. The human brain loves that stuff.
Yeah, it wants to know how things resolve.
Yeah, it will stop at nothing to want to know.
Yeah,
it'll just mull over it. Mm-hmm. Okay, the next letter is U, and U stands for urgency. And this one comes from Parkinson's law. So the idea of Parkinson's law is that, I guess the short answer is, work expands to fill the time available for its completion, which basically means like if you give yourself a certain amount of time to do something, then you're going to take up all that time.
If you don't set time restrictions on the things you have to focus on, your brain will take as much time as it needs to, or as it wants to.
Yeah.
So deadlines, urgency. I mean, studying for an exam. Most people went to school. They've had to study in college. Or even like if you're a working professional right now and you have a deadline to meet, it's pretty common for people to put off doing work until the last minute. Why? Because that's when the deadline is. You're going to finish your work by the deadline. And so what we're doing with urgency is we're creating artificial deadlines so that we can finish the work we need to in a shorter time frame.
It works in both ways too, because if let's say you have something due in a week and you finish all of your work within the first day, a lot of people are still going to be like, oh, I can go back and change it. Like, oh, I'll make a few more adjustments. I'll just make adjustments all the way up until the deadline. It's like, if you just finish it and you submit it, then you can't even touch it.
Yeah.
That's the best case scenario.
Sure. Yeah. You completely remove it from your head.
But the thing is, like, even if you decide to put it off till the very last minute, the brain somehow finds a way to pull it together and you just get hyper focused. Like, you know how when you procrastinate, you're like cramming for exam the night before.
Yeah.
Your brain just somehow musters all this energy up and you get hyper focused. And that's where all the focus comes from, is that sense of urgency. So urgency, I mean, it's not fun or healthy to like stress yourself out with procrastination and urgency all the time just to get that extra focus. So what we do instead is we just try to create our own sense of urgency. And one of the best ways to do that is we use a timer,
Right.
because time pressure gives us that sense of urgency. When you see the clock running down, it gives you that psychological feeling like, oh, I'm going to get my work done within this set amount of time. And that gives you the focus and you're more productive that way.
Yeah. And there's multiple layers of how you can do that. Like what we talked about is one, the focus session is never longer than 90 minutes. And so that there is the maximum amount of your urgent time pressure that you need to instill in yourself. But the other time pressure that you can include for yourself, this comes more in the preparatory phase, but it is identifying highlights or important things that you want to attend during the week. So for example, like if you really want to make it to a friend's birthday party, or if you really want to make time for your girlfriend or your boyfriend, like date night or something like that, that in itself is creating an urgent deadline for yourself, that you need to finish your work so that you can spend time with your loved ones or spend time with how you want to. And so even having that clarity of like, yeah, I want to do this during this time later on, I will finish my work before then. And so that's another great reason why planning ahead is so important. It creates urgent deadlines for you to finish work by.
Yeah. I mean, those deadlines can give you excitement. Yeah, I just remember like you set far in advance, oh, I'm going to get to go to this event or this concert with my family and friends. Like that's something super fun. I definitely want to do that. I definitely don't want to be in my head thinking about my work during that time. So yeah, it's exciting to get my work done and have that time. Okay, next one is S. What was S? Surroundings. So surroundings has to do with cognitive load. And your cognitive load is like how much strain you're putting on your mind, like forcing it to think about a whole bunch of different things. The way I like to explain it is that even though you're currently trying to focus on the task right in front of you, your mind is still taking in a lot of input from all around you. Like even though you're reading a book in front of you, your mind is still taking in like the sounds and the smells and what you see around you. Like your desk is very cluttered. So surroundings means you want to alleviate and get rid of all the inputs so as to reduce as much cognitive load as possible so that all of your attention can be on the task. The rule is out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So you get rid of everything. And the biggest thing you want to get rid of is your phone.
Yep.
Because even if your phone is off and turned over and silenced and muted and everything, if it's still in sight, then it's still going to be on your mind. It's just you're going to be sitting there trying to do your work, and then you're trying to also, with part of your mind, you're trying to resist using the phone. And you don't want to spend your mental effort resisting using the phone. That's a lot of waste of energy. So just get it out of your mind, and you don't have to do that at all.
Surroundings is very much just environmental design.
And
So,
I like you said design,
Mm-hmm.
because design doesn't mean removing things.
No. Well, it does, but it also means introducing things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
There are things that would make you more focused. If you're trying to edit videos and you have a really crappy internet connection, or if you're teaching and you don't have a strong internet connection on Zoom or something, and you can't even hear your students, then you're not going to do a good job. So there are things that you also want to introduce into your environment that makes it easier to focus.
Yeah. You want all the things that you need to be there, because you would be breaking your focus if you had to get up and go get it. And so you need all the things prepared.
Tech stack, nutrition,
Yeah.
everything.
Water.
Yeah. So that's the focus checklist.
Yeah. Missing one more thing though. Once we finish the focus checklist, we always wrap it up the same way. We say, thank you for this focus. It is a way for us to add like that ritualistic component to this behavior.
Building a kind of a culture.
Yeah. Building
Around-
a culture.
Culture around focus.
Some spirituality around focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more you can introduce some kind of sense of belonging with any actions, with any skill that you're building, then it inherently increases the motivation behind it. If you know that you're not alone in doing what you're doing, it's very useful.
Yeah. So we like to do the focus session with a group whenever possible. And we run through the checklist together. And at the end, everyone says, thank you for this focus.
I mean, the people who have been joining us with it have loved it. I think it's actually been very useful for me as well. Like I don't necessarily think anymore that I am someone who has difficulty with focusing. I can work all day and cycle between focus and diffuse mode, but doing it with other people is just more fun. And as someone who now works from home, and I know a lot of people are remote workers, they work from home, it can be pretty lonely. If you're just grinding, if you're an engineer, software engineer that's coding for hours, if you're whatever work you do at home, like having people at least peripherally or spiritually doing it with you makes it a lot easier, makes it more enjoyable. Yeah, because otherwise there would be days where I didn't talk to anybody, and it's kind of tough to stay motivated. It doesn't even matter that we're all not even focused on the same thing. Like most people that we work with are doing different things. It's not the idea about doing the same thing. It's about doing the same practice. And we'd encourage anyone, if you're interested in joining us in those sessions, you can hop over to our Discord or join the community. We love doing it. But yeah, just to recap everything that we talked about, focus is probably the most valuable skill that you can develop.
It's the most valuable skill and is the most important resource.
Yeah.
Most valuable resource.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's time. I think time has generically been the one that people say, oh, time is your most important resource. It's focus. I firmly believe that focus is more important. Without focus, you could spend all the time on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Without focus, you could waste your life doing the wrong thing. A lot of people do. A lot of people spend 10, 20, 30 years in jobs they hate, grinding on things they hate, relationships they hate, in marriages they hate, because they didn't take the time to prepare, engage, and sustain in the right things that they want to do. And so this is a skill that I think will serve anybody. It'll make you wealthy. It'll make you powerful. It'll make you clear-headed, and it'll make you enjoy creating a life that you want to. And so it's what we love. It's what we teach, and that's why we do what we do.